I'm Maria Ressa. This is hashtag hold the line. We started using that at the end of 2016, 2017, and it's become this much more meaningful phrase for me. Hashtag hold the line. What is the line you draw, right? Where on this side you're good, on this side you're evil. Joining us today is somebody you will love. Carole Cadwalladr broke the Cambridge Analytica story in 2018, and she is the founder. Well, it's her brainchild to put up something called the Real Facebook Oversight Board that has really kept Facebook's feet in the fire. Carole, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Maria. It's so nice to see you. And actually, it's great to kind of like get to know Rappler a bit better, actually, because I'm very inspired by everything you've done there.
Well, and vice versa. I mean, you were one of the last dinners I think I had before the lockdown began a year ago, and that was when you were just dreaming of the Real Facebook Oversight Board. So let me ask you, I mean, it's called hashtag hold the line. What are the lines that are important for you right now that you define?
Well, you know what, Maria, I kind of thought I need you to help me figure this out, because I think that in a way I operate so much from instinct. And I'm not in some senses, this sort of like stepping back and trying to like really think in very clear ways, which you do, which is where I need to learn from you. So I kind of thought maybe you can help me figure it out, because I think, I mean, I was just I only had a sort of a brief moment this morning to think about it. And I think with me, it's that I come from this place, which is that I've been very lucky and very privileged in that, I've been a features journalist with a great newspaper, The Observer in the UK. And until 4 years ago, a vast majority of what I was doing was, interviewing interesting people and, kind of following at diverse. And basically, I had the liberty and the freedom to be able to do that because I live in a country with, several hundred years of, parliamentary, rule with, an advanced democracy, strong rule of law, a robust judiciary, electoral laws which worked, basically a system of checks and checks and what's the word? Checks and balances. And I believe that worked. I believe this was the country that I lived in and the world that I lived in. And I didn't have to worry about things which people in other countries had to worry about on a day-to-day basis. So worrying about corruption, worrying about breach of rule of law, worrying about authoritarianism, worrying about the shutting down of the free press. I was kind of, I knew it happened, and I knew even in Britain it happened, but it wasn't like an overwhelming preoccupation. And for me, I've been plunged very much into having to deal with that. And that was what happened to me in sort of, in the end of 2016, was that it was this sudden moment of realizing that there was these massive forces and powers which were out of control. There were no checks and balances, and that some really, I went on to find out some really extremely concerning things had happened during particularly during our referendum.
Yes.
And that there had been unlawful behaviour. And that in many ways this was an election which had been corrupted, and the what had enabled that was this beast, this behemoth Facebook, and from which, even though we're now in a position in which we know so much more about what happened, we know so much more about what happened in the Philippines in your election, we know so much more about what happened in the US election, but we're still not able to hold anybody to account. So we haven't held the tech companies to account. In Britain, we totally failed to hold the government to account over what happened. And the thing that I see, and this is where the line is, if you don't hold these powers to account, They just go on and do more and more and worse. And in Britain, I see an absolutely clear line between our failure to hold to account what happened during the referendum and the fact that we had in place a government with no respect for rule of law, for no respect for due diligence, and who believed that they could get away with it. And they did get away with it. And that's, why we've seen 150,000 people die, essentially. I see a really clear line between it. So yeah, I didn't, for me, I suppose the line has been an evolution, really.
Well, the interesting thing about the work you do, about your journalism, is that it's very left brain, right brain. We were talking about this. You get you're an empathetic reporter, and yet at the same time, you get to the core, and you broke the Cambridge Analytica story, right? I guess there were costs to doing that. What were the costs to doing the Cambridge Analytica story?
I love your left brain, right brain thing, because I think that when you said that to me the other day, I thought, that's such a kind of good way of thinking about it. Because when I look back, what happened to me from sort of November 2016, when I kind of stumbled across what was happening, my alarm bells just went off. I just, it's just that I was just sort of alert, alert, danger, danger, something incredibly dangerous is happening. And because I was in this position of kind of stumbling across this sort of evidence trail, I felt compelled to follow it. And for a long time, I was in a position where I couldn't hand over. There was nobody to kind of just sort of actually the authorities have got this, or, the crack investigative team from what we know, they didn't show up. So it was very much I felt this personal, duty to follow it. And yeah, I mean, and the costs have been, I'm only starting to reckon with the costs, but the costs have been quite painful. I was never a public figure. I never wanted to be a public figure. I've always been very private. I wasn't on social media in any meaningful way. I never wanted to be. I hated public speaking, literally I'd never done a panel before, and so I've really had to force myself out in this uncomfortable way. It's not comfortable for me being public and being exposed, and this I've had to go against the grain, even though I seem like I'm just a loudmouth. You shouldn't have any problem with that. Actually I found it really difficult, and the cost has been that in Britain, the whole thing is that, as what we're dealing with here is a machinery which can be mobilized. It can be gamed by bad actors of any political persuasion. But in Britain, where I was looking at this erosion of democracy and the tech platform's role in that, and the use of bad actors, it positioned me in a cultural war. So instead of it being this is defending the rule of law, it's defending our national security. Is I was seen as a rampant anti-Brexiteer. I was a Ramona. I was, and that fed into this language of misogyny and abuse, which is kind of characterizes our cultural war. And so I found myself targeted and smeared by leading BBC presenters. I mean, it's kind of insane. This guy Andrew Neil, who is is a very authoritative, is one of the main anchors on BBC Politics, called me a crazy cat lady on Twitter, and that's now a language of abuse which is used about me, left, right, and centre. And it's had an impact, because it stopped me doing the job that I once did, because I'm now seen as a controversial figure, and I'm seen as a partisan controversial figure, essentially, when I was literally just trying to do my job.
And I know this really well. I mean, this is why in some ways, so for folks who are watching, Carole, I don't even know how to describe this. The UNESCO report that was just released for World Press Freedom Day describes what happened to Carole as networked gaslighting, right? The truth teller is herself portrayed as somebody who has a vested interest, right? And is attacked. These are similar things that have happened to me in the Philippines. That report, Carole, focused on the two of us and analyzed more than 2 million social media posts. And you're right. So when you came under attack that way, how did you deal with it?
Badly. With difficulty. I mean, I still find it really difficult, and I'm still trapped by it. You know, there is an element of that. I'm a sort of fly caught in amber. I'm caught in this Brexit moment and in this cultural war, and I haven't yet worked out how to overcome that. And I think you, Maria, I mean, like, this is where you're sort of like, you know, you helped me, I think, understand the like how dangerous and pernicious it is that this, like, what happens online and the framing enables this sort of real life you know, impacts. And that is, you know, I kind of like, I am trapped, you know, to a much lesser degree, and I'm, you know, and I as I say, there are so many things I have to give thanks for. But I think the fact is that I have been this culture of harassment, essentially, which has gone on for 4 years, you know, does manifest in different ways. And I have to be careful what I say, but I have a legal case against me for defamation. And I do think there's a sort of enabling environment to that. I've got to be careful, as I sort of say, because everything I say now about that can be taken down and evidenced and used against me. So, and that's why for me the UNESCO report was. I mean, I think Julie did an amazing job of, you know, because she paints this because it's sort of so diverse and wide ranging, and there are so many different examples in so many different parts of the world, but there is also a sort of universality to it. And I think, you know, one of the things that for me was very powerful as well about it is that misogyny isn't recognised online.
Correct.
You know, I in Britain at least, I think, you know, racism will be called out and anti-Semitism will be called out, but just make a sexist remark and, you know, frame that, then that's just, you get away with it. But, and there's something kind of like, there's something really depressing I find about the you know, the added level of difficulty of any woman in doing something in public being framed in that way. I mean, it is just, there's a sort of universality to it, I think, isn't there?
Well, you also just held power to account, right? You blew the whistle on all of this. It was your reporting. Even the whistleblower of Cambridge Analytica, Chris Wiley, suffered for doing that. He was bumped off all of Facebook's properties. And you took in the impact, right? And you still are, but you've also put together the real Facebook Oversight Board. You have not stopped. Tell me what, I sound like I don't know. Yes, we talked about the idea of it. So please
That's
tell.
right, Maria. I mean, I think you could like count yourself as in very much partly responsible for that after all, because I think it's, you know, all that is just channeling the frustration and the outrage of a lot of individuals, including yourself, who have been identifying the problems and trying to speak out about it and trying to make the moral case as to why it's so unacceptable, and not having a platform. Basically, all it was is that sort of like individually, like there's a lot of individuals and even organizations which have had a platform to do that. But where I came from was this, like, we need to bring everybody together to amplify those individual voices. And we need to have some coherence to it and essentially mesh because we've got these kind of like amazing academics and journalists like yourself, and also the civil rights leaders are so important. And particularly this was very much it was very much an emergency response to what we could see happening in real time. We could see that Donald Trump was using Facebook to subvert the election. Everybody could see it. Everybody was saying it, but there was no way to influence or impact Facebook. They are impervious, and there was no mechanism at all to get them to do so. So the only thing really that I could see, we could see, which is that we just need to bring, the kind of the moral leaders together. So the civil rights leaders, Rashad Robinson from Colour of Change, Derek Johnson from the NAACP, Jonathan Greenblatt from the Anti-Defamation League, Jessica Gonzalez from Free Press. We brought them together with the kind of, these incredible experts like Shoshana Zuboff, who's the sort of queen. I always consider her the queen in many ways of surveillance capitalism. And also figures like, I just love what Larry Tribe brought to it. So he's this incredible constitutional scholar. Nobody knows more about him. But he's somebody, who's had this huge career at the law, but he really sees the unaccountability of the tech platforms as a fundamental danger to the integrity of the US Constitution and Republic. And so it was just, that was the thinking behind it. But it's, it's very much a work in progress, figuring out if it is useful to carry on and what it's useful carrying on doing. But I mean, one of the things I do see as key is that, Facebook spends absolutely billions on PR, lobbying, marketing. I mean, it's out there shaping the narrative every single day. And like one of the key things we're just trying to do is be like the Facebook counter disinformation unit.
Yeah. Well, it's been successful. I mean, we launched.
Yeah, it's right. Take responsibility, Maria.
Yes, we launched with a month before the U.S. elections, and within the first 24 hours, the three demands of the real Facebook Oversight Board, Facebook granted the three demands, right? Taking control. But let me ask you, you also are at this juncture, of the shifting face of journalism, and exactly how you put together the real Facebook Oversight Board of activism. And I've constantly said now for the last few years that when it's a battle for facts, journalism is activism. But you are in the West. I mean, you're in the UK, right? The Guardian is celebrating its 200th anniversary. How do you define that moment, that in many ways you're right at the juncture of it?
Well, again, I'm just following your footsteps, Maria. I mean, I love the fact that you've been so outspoken about that. And I love the fact that, talking to you as you're sort of saying, is that, inside CNN, you did a lot of like helping define like journalistic culture and what the ethics were of CNN. And so for you to come from that place, coming from that culture of like really big news organizations, but sort of like saying, actually, we have to be activists too, is incredibly powerful. And I think that you have changed things with that. And I think that because I was really shocked. What happened to me was that I was a way of criticizing me, and which was very much used like by the people in Britain who were very upset with my investigations into Brexit. They said of me, like repeatedly, it was like, she's not a journalist, she's an activist. And this is also, it's very much the framing for my legal case as well, that is kind of like she went too far. She's like, this is activism took over instead of journalism. And, it really kind of like troubled me initially. And when I sort of thought about it, and I felt, well, and I was like, what, this idea that like activist is a dirty word. And I was like, well, I am an activist for the truth. and I'm an activist for the authorities doing the job that they're supposed to be in, defending rule of law and defending our democracy. And mine was that, I tried repeatedly for, I spent 2 years on this very specific thing around the breaking of our electoral laws and like the consequences of that. And I totally failed. I failed to hold them. They were proven by the authorities and fines were levied, but it never became part of public consciousness. It was just, they got away with it in that sense. And I was an activist for my story. I was an activist for these kind of crimes which had been committed. I was an activist for this abuse of power which had been enabled by Facebook. I was an activist for the fact that they continue to cover it up. And it is just, the difference, the thing that I learned really on in this story is that it's just not enough to publish the facts. Because I published the facts in the very first story I did, and it just it was Google, the first bit of the story, and they just ignored it. And I was kind of normally what I've done in journalism, I write the story and then I move on to the next thing. And I was like, actually, I'm not going to move on because this is literally they're spreading lies about the Holocaust here. I refuse to move on. I cannot live in a world in which you Google the Holocaust and you get delivered to a Nazi website. That is not acceptable. And so I just carried on. And that's been I was always thinking about, well, how do I make people care? What do I do to what's the thing that I can actually connect to people and make them actually give a shit about this stuff? And that's just essentially what I just continued, I go on and I do now. And so with Facebook, it's like, how do we connect this? How do we annoy Facebook sufficiently that they actually pay attention? And, how do we communicate this to the public? So if that is a kind of activism, then yes, so be it.
I think that's called journalism. And I think it's also part of the reason. Well, it's also part of the reason that you are at the forefront of the stories that matter, of the technology that is changing our behavior, right? We are at time, but I want to ask you, you actually create every day. Where, as you hold the line, where do you find the courage?
You know what? It's really not courage at all. All it is that I don't want to live in that world, and it makes me feel better to be doing things. That's it. So it's actually kind of selfish and personal in that sense. Is that if I can mobilize others to kind of understand what's going on and to help, then it kind of dials down my anxiety and alarm about this world I don't want to live in. So that's where it comes. It's essentially fundamentally selfish.
Oh, I think you downplay. It's so funny. I was talking to our lawyers 2 or 3 days ago, and I was asking, so how do you deal with this? Because there is a lot coming because our world is changing. I think that's what you're capturing. And it was Amal Clooney who said that her phrase is actionable anger.
Oh, it's fuel. That's the thing. That's the only thing I can say is that the sort of even though what I have coming at me has been really difficult and it's definitely laid me low at times, it is fuel. I kind of I do try and channel it back out. It's like you catch the grenade coming in, you rip out the pin, you chuck it back. And that's kind of what energizes me. It's been for the last week, both of us have been involved in lobbing bombs over the sort of the perimeter fence into Facebook HQ. And it's delightful when one goes off.
Carole, thank you. Well, we'll keep working together. Thank you so much for holding the line. Thank you.